Hello and welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. I'm your host, Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold. As always, I'm joined by Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report. The weekend review, the Tigers signed Framber Valdez, 3 years, $115 million with an opt-out clause after the second season. Tarik Skubal won his arbitration hearing against the Tigers, securing a $32 million salary for the 2026 season. That was last week. The big news for this week, pitchers and catchers report to spring training in one day. It's Tuesday right now, and pitchers and catchers are reporting Wednesday, February 11th to Tiger Town in Lakeland, Florida. Other important dates coming up. We have position players reporting Sunday, February 15th. And then the first spring training game is February 21st against the Yankees in Tampa. Chris, the Super Bowl is in the books with the Seahawks taking down the Patriots in a boring game. Are you ready for spring training? It's baseball season.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is always, everybody loves this, right? It's hope springs eternal, right? Spring, right there in the name. Everything about spring training is great at the beginning. I know it gets to be a drag toward the end for everybody, I think, except for the guys who are fighting for jobs. But it's just great to have baseball back and also, be able to look forward to the spring and then the summer, which is always kind of what this means to me.
Yeah, I know all of our listeners back in Detroit. I know it's been cold there, but it is warm here in Lakeland, Florida. High of 77 degrees today. I'm definitely not taking the warm weather for granted, but for all those folks back in Detroit, it is coming soon. Don't worry. Spring is here. It's just around the corner. Before you know it, it's going to warm up back home. On that note, let's get right into the big two. Question one of the big two. What are the top three storylines that you are going to be tracking in spring training?
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, for me, I'm not the average fan here, and I'm not trying to pick like the three biggest storylines that'll probably be, Tarik Skubal and Framber Valdez and all that good stuff. But the first thing I'm going to be looking forward to is how do Colt Keith and Parker Meadows look in the spring? The Tigers have kind of 9 regulars, I think, now, for the most part. I mean, they're going to get mixed and match a lot, but we know what to expect from most of them. I think there'll be some ups and downs, but I think Keith and Meadows are kind of the two biggest wild cards of the presumed regulars, at third base and center field. I want to see how Keith looks on defense. I want to see how Meadows looks on defense. Does he look like the 2024 Parker Meadows or the Parker Meadows from last year? Looked a little tentative. And, I want to see how well they hit. You don't ever want to put too much stock into spring training stats, of course. We've seen fake good springs and, pitchers aren't out there targeting your weaknesses. But all things being equal, I'd like to see good plate appearances and some hard contact. We saw that from Spencer Torkelson last year, and that was really the start of good things to come. So that's kind of what I'm looking for from those two.
Yeah, even when you talk about guys like Colt Keith and Parker Meadows, I think Colt Keith is in a position where he has a really good chance to have a breakout year. And I'm not just talking about any old breakout year. I'm talking about an all-star caliber breakout year. But Parker Meadows, he's one that I'm definitely going to be watching closely, along with somebody like Matt Vierling, too. I mean, both those guys were injured last year, and to see what they can be moving forward, I think we have an idea of what the baseline is for Colt Keith. I don't think we really have any idea what Parker Meadows will be, what Matt Vierling will be. You think about Parker Meadows in particular, you go back and, entering the 2025 season, I mean, this guy was supposed to be an X factor. I mean, it was elite production on offense and defense in the second half of 2024. And then he comes into 2025 and it's this rare nerve injury in his arm that happens in spring training. He misses 60 games and then he misses another 34 games with a quad injury. He struggles on offense. He was worth -1 defensive run saved in center field. A lot went wrong for Parker Meadows in 25. I'm curious to see what does a healthy Parker Meadows look like beginning in spring training? And it's kind of the same for Matt Vierling. I mean, he had a career best, 2024, and going into 2025, the thought was, man, this guy could play all three outfield positions. He could be a regular at third base, without Alex Bregman when the Tigers failed to sign him going into the 2025 season. It was okay, Matt Vierling could be a great fallback here. And then it was a shoulder injury and an oblique injury, and it was just stop and start with the injuries. And suddenly he has the worst season of his 5-year MLB career. So Matt Vierling, I think he's a leader in the clubhouse, and he's somebody who, this is a guy, if he's right, he can make a really big impact for this team, but he's got to be healthy, and then he's got to be able to produce. I'm circling Matt Vierling and Parker Meadows. And then when it comes to Colt Keith, I have pretty high expectations for him.
So the second thing I'm looking at here, and this is, again, just me, everybody interacts with baseball a different way. Some people like to go and take score or keep score, as it were. But for me, I love to just, as soon as you can, you get onto those TrackMan cameras, the Hawkeye or whatever, I pull up the Baseball Savant, and I love to get deep into the pitch nerdery because pitchers are always working on something. And I love to see who has changed over the offseason, looking for spikes in movement or spin or velocity. You wrote a story about Kyle Finnegan. He wants to throw the slider a little bit more. And I'm curious to see what other guys make sort of usage changes like that. Are we did Jack Flaherty had a kick change? I mean, we probably would have known that by now, but that would be a fun thing to do. How does Troy Melton Splitter look? Does Casey Mize have 5 breaking balls now? And then there's so many relievers. It's just fun digging into the data and seeing which one of those guys is going to stand out. Now, I'm no Lance Brozdowski when it comes to this sort of stuff, but I enjoy it. It's fun to me. Yeah. And then my final point here, and this is, probably not surprising for anybody who knows me, but I'm really interested to see what kind of impressions the kids make. It's not just like I want to see, McGonigle and Clark look like they belong in the big leagues and go and have impressive camps, but they're not the only young guys in camp this year. I'm wondering how Hao-Yu Lee will look in his second camp. He was the talk of the early camp last year, and he seemed to be pressing a ton. I'm curious to see this year if he can calm down a little bit. But Max Anderson's out there. How's he going to look? Jace Young, it's getting kind of late early here as he seems to be the odd man out, but can he make his way back into the conversation? And then you've got like the 3 hulking catcher, first base DH types and Josue Briseño, Tyron Lorenzo, and Eduardo Valencia. I mean, those guys are all very interesting, got a lot of power. Want to see what kind of impressions they make. And I'm also excited to see how John Peck looks, see him get some chances to show what he can do on defense in front of some crowds. So I think he could, we talk about Matt Vierling. I think John Peck could theoretically be the next Matt Vierling in a year or two. So I'm curious to see how these guys are going to look.
What do you think about John Peck? Because as we sit here today, the Tigers have 24 non-roster invitees to spring training. And obviously you knew about Max Clark and Kevin McGonigle and Max Anderson and Josue Briseño and even somebody like a Tyler Madison. You knew those guys were going to be on the list. But then suddenly you see a guy like John Peck on that list, and he's a shortstop. What can you tell us about John Peck? And do you think there really could be a future for him with the Tigers at the big league level? Or is this just a body to fill a spot at this point? Or do you think there actually is prospect upside that he could tap into and really become something one day?
No, I absolutely do think he's a very interesting prospect. I don't know if he has the upside of an everyday regular, but he's got big league tools. He is a plus runner. He's a plus defender, can handle shortstop, can handle third base, can handle second base. He hasn't played the outfield, but I could see him adding that down the road. And he hits the ball really, really hard. And he generally stays in the strike zone. There's a little bit of swing and miss in the zone, but there's a lot to like there. And that's kind of why compared to Matt Vierling, nothing is crazy good, but this is a big league athlete and a guy who could, anytime you can get a guy who could play shortstop at the big league level, that's somebody worth keeping an eye on. And he's got some more enticing tools there to keep it, to get excited about. So I just want to see how it looks, against big league pitching if he gets many chances in spring. He may not be there for long, but I think it's also a nice reward for him as a guy who's worked pretty hard and has moved the system somewhat quietly. He got to Double-A last year, but he's an exciting prospect of the potential utility type.
So the 3 storylines that I'm going to be tracking in spring training, obviously there is a long list of storylines to track, but 3 that stand out to me as we're getting ready for spring training to start is number 1, Javier Báez or Zach McKinstry. Which player keeps the seat warm for Kevin McGonigle at shortstop? Because look, people, we all know Kevin McGonigle's coming. It may not be on the opening day roster, but if it's not the opening day roster, you got to think by at least August. And I've said I think he may come up in mid-August to preserve his rookie eligibility for 2027. But look, whether it's earlier than that, whether it's August, whether the Tigers completely delay it and he doesn't come up until 2027 opening day, right? Who is going to be the primary shortstop in 2026 until Kevin McGonigle arrives? Because I do think the Tigers are going to give Kevin McGonigle a chance to be a shortstop. They may send him to Double-A Erie or to Triple-A Toledo and say that they want to see him work on third base and they want to see him work on second base and they want to, give him a chance to really develop his defensive versatility while also proving himself offensively again at the Double-A level and then making that jump to Triple-A. Those are all things that the Tigers want to see out of their prospects. I would not think that it's any different with somebody like Kevin McGonigle, but I do think when Kevin McGonigle arrives, if that shortstop spot is open, the Tigers are not going to hesitate to give him a chance there. And so my question is, who is going to be that guy until Kevin McGonigle gets there? Is it going to be Javier Báez? Is it going to be Zach McKinstry? We know Javi Báez, he is one of the highest paid players on the roster, and he's got three-time All-Star. Like, he's been doing this for a really long time. But Zach McKinstry, I mean, among the Tigers shortstop options, he did have the most consistent performance in 2025. It was a career best season for him. He hit nearly 260. He had 12 home runs, 46 walks, 111 strikeouts in 144 games. And also, most importantly, Zach McKinstry was worth +4 defensive runs saved in 248 innings at shortstop. So not only was Zach McKinstry an all-star, not only was he a silver slugger, but also he was above average defensively at shortstop, which I think makes him a good fit to be the Tigers' primary shortstop going into 2025. But Javier Báez, what he did in the playoffs, it was really impressive. So I could see that being a pretty big battle in spring training in terms of who gets more time at shortstop, Javier Báez or Zach McKinstry. Do you have any thoughts on how that could play out? We know Zach McKinstry is probably going to regress. You know, he was worth 3.2 FWAR in 2025. There's no way that happens again in 2026. I wouldn't think. But do you think he can do enough in spring to fend off what Javier Báez did in the postseason? Because what Javi did in the postseason was really impressive, but we know Javi's been hot and cold.
Yeah, you know, I'm actually working on trying to put together rosters for the entire org right now for the minor league side of it things. And I like to start at the major league level. And right now I do have Báez as the starting shortstop, but it's really a coin flip for me. And if it's going to come down to a pure platoon, then absolutely I could see McKinstry starting there. And like you laid it out, you know, he's got a lot of production. He played well at shortstop last year, and he's the left-handed bat. So he's going to get more plate appearances theoretically. I kind of defer to the expensive veteran right now, but I'm not putting it in stone by any means.
I do remember going back to the MLB winter meetings in early December, AJ Hinch talking about how they feel like it's possible that the best usage of Javier Báez is to use him at multiple different positions. Second base, shortstop, center field, maybe even a little bit of third base as well. So I think if we get into spring training and we get into the regular season, and if Parker Meadows is scuffling, I don't think the Tigers are going to wait around to give Javi some more opportunities in center, which I think then kind of creates this natural spot for Zach McKinstry at shortstop, at least until Kevin McGonigle arrives. And again, right now we're working under the theory that Kevin McGonigle is not going to be on the opening day roster. But of course, maybe he could hit his way on there. I mean, we'll see. I'm not expecting that to happen, but I'm also a never say never kind of guy. The second storyline that I'm tracking is, does Colt Keith lock down third base, and does he take a step forward on offense? I think for Colt Keith, the door is wide open for him to be the everyday third baseman for the Tigers, not only hitting against right-handed pitchers, but also hitting against left-handed pitchers too. Guys, let's remember, this is Colt Keith. He was one of the top prospects in baseball before he made his debut. Like, this is a guy that the Tigers locked up to a long-term contract because he is a special talent. And yeah, the Tigers tried to sign Alex Bregman, going into the 2025 season. And then it was Matt Vierling, and he suffered this shoulder injury. And then Jace Young, he couldn't hit. And then Zach McKinstry, he goes from being a third baseman to this like true utility role where he's kind of playing all over the place. And then finally, Colt Keith, in early June, he gets this opportunity to play third base. And he kind of ran with it from there. So I thought he was pretty average at third base, which is good enough for me when it comes to Colt Keith. I think it was 0 defensive runs saved in just over 250 innings there at the hot corner. He hit 256 with 13 home runs, 48 walks, 102 strikeouts in 137 games. I think he needs to take a step forward on offense. Colt Keith is somebody that I love what he brings to the table from a all-around type of a standpoint, but I just want to see him tap into more power. Like, he did improve the OPS from 2024 to 2025. He improved the walk rate from 2024 to 2025. And most importantly, he improved the average exit velocity from 2024 to 2025. There was a pretty significant jump there from about 88 miles an hour to 90 miles an hour for Colt Keith with the exit velocity. And then obviously expanded the defensive versatility with first base and getting back to playing some third base. And we know he can play second. So you can use him at all different spots, but he still hasn't tapped into that all-star potential or the 20 home run potential that I think he's capable of. And he wasn't able to do it in his age 22 season, and he wasn't able to do it in his age 23 season, but he's still young. He's only entering his age 24 season. So I think if everything goes right for Colt Keith, he becomes the everyday third baseman, and he gets to a point where we're talking about him in the all-star conversation as a 20 homer guy, as somebody who's, gonna hit 260, 270, with 20 plus home runs. I think Colt Keith can be that guy as the everyday third baseman. And I think it starts in spring training. So I'll be watching that very closely. Do you see the upside as that for Colt Keith, or are you a little bit more pessimistic about the outlook for 2026 with Keith?
No, I've always been high on Keith's upside. I think you laid it out there. I think there's a chance for him to be a really solid all-star level hitter and at least a decent defender at third base, right? Like I'm not pushing for him to ever be a Gold Glover or anything like that, but I think he can hold his own there. And I think given a chance to really just focus on that, he'll get to close to average. And then it's just a matter of putting it all together at the plate. He really did have a solid 4-month stretch last year. It was basically March, April, and then September when things went sour on him. So just putting together full season, and I think he can get there.
Then the third storyline that I'm going to be watching is who is the biggest name to suffer an injury in spring training, because somebody always gets hurt. And obviously right now, all eyes on Reese Olson. I've heard rumblings that things are not great there. We're going to find out sooner rather than later on him. So maybe, that storyline has already been answered with Reese Olson, but you hope that there's nobody else beyond that, because throughout spring training, it always seems like there is somebody who gets hurt. We saw it last spring. Parker Meadows, Matt Vierling, Wenzel Perez, all of those guys got hurt in spring training. And would you believe that Ryan Kreidler was the opening day center fielder for the Detroit Tigers in 2025? Like, is there going to be a repeat of that? Whether it's somebody in the rotation, somebody in the bullpen, or a position player. Like, I hate to throw out bad omens, but God forbid Tarik Skubal gets hurt, right? Like, this is somebody that the Tigers are going to rely on. I mean, he is their workhorse. He is their guy. He is the $32 million man now. Hopefully he doesn't get injured. Hopefully, the Tigers are able to go into their season with Kenley Jansen, Kyle Finnegan, and Will Vest leading the way in that bullpen. You lose one of those guys and you don't feel as strong about the bullpen anymore. Like, those three leading the way as like a three-headed monster in save situations, feel pretty good about. But when you get down to only two of those names, if it's just Kenley Jansen and Kyle Finnegan, or if it's just Kyle Finnegan and Will Vest, it's like, man, it feels like that bullpen is missing an important piece. So hopefully everybody stays healthy. If there is somebody and it is Reese Olson, hopefully that is the only player who is hurt. But it always seems like there's an injury that pops up. Hopefully it's not to somebody who the Tigers are obviously putting a lot of stock into going into 2026, but it's always something we got to watch going into camp. All right, let's get into question 2 of the big 2. If opening day started today, which 26 players do you think the Tigers would select? Not which 26 players would you select, but which 26 players do you think the Tigers would select?
Yeah. So to me, there's only really a handful of open roster battles right now. Like, and you said, injuries can change all of that anytime. It may completely change it. But for me, I look right now, there's really only one position open on offense, and it's the 13th position player, assuming McGonigle doesn't take the job. The 2 catchers are set. The outfielders are probably set in Green, Meadows, Carpenter, and Jahmai Jones. Utility guys are probably set in McKinstry and Vierling. And the infield seems to be set with Torkelson, Torres. I picked Báez, but could be McKinstry, and Colt Keith. So it probably comes down to Trey Sweeney and Wenzel Perez. And MLB managers are always worried about the worst case scenario. And I don't think AJ Hitch would be comfortable going north with just 2 players who could play shortstop. So to me, that means Trey Sweeney is beating out Wenzel Perez, probably. Now, there is one very interesting dark horse candidate here in Trey Cruz, who is now on the 40-man roster. He can play shortstop and center field in every other position, and he's a switch hitter. So that might be kind of interesting, but I would not plug him in right now.
That's interesting. I didn't really consider that, right? Taking Trey Cruz north, but I also didn't even think about the fact that you're right. Like, do you leave yourself in a position where it's Javi Báez and Zach McKinstry as the only players on your roster who can play shortstop? And I've always viewed Wenzel Perez as a lock, just playing in right field. And that way Kerry Carpenter can be your primary DH and you can keep him healthy. Like, to me, that makes a ton of sense. And I viewed it as, Dylan Dingler's locked in at catcher. Spencer Torkelson's locked in at first base. Gleyber Torres is locked in at second base. Zach McKinstry, Javi Báez, however you want to do it. At shortstop, I have Zach McKinstry. You have Javi Báez. And then the outfield, it's been Riley Green in left, Parker Meadows in center, Wenzel Perez in right, Kerry as a designated hitter, Jake Rogers is the backup catcher on the bench. Again, Javi Báez or Zach McKinstry, who gets that bench role. Like I said, I have Javi for the bench role. You have Zach McKinstry for the bench role. And then Matt Vierling is that 4th outfielder, and he can play at third base if you need. And then Jahmai Jones, I don't really view him as an outfielder. I view him as more of just a lefty specialist, DH type off the bench as the complement to Kerry Carpenter in that DH spot. But I didn't consider the Wenzel Perez, Trey Sweeney potential battle there. Do you really think that they would carry Trey Sweeney just because he can play shortstop? Or is that a situation where if somebody were to get hurt, then they can try to go to the minor leagues and pull up somebody like a Trey Cruz if they really need to?
all things being equal, I think they prefer to have Winslow Perez. But like I said, I feel like even, a manager like AJ Hinch, as progressive as he is, I just always feel like managers and coaches always defer to like, oh, worst case scenario. Now they're perfectly fine with going with 2 catchers, right? So maybe having 2 shortstops is fine. And they may just go for the Winslow's bat, like you said, gets Kerry Carpenter off his feet more and he's a switch hitter and stuff.
I mean, Trey Sweeney has options, right? So you could send him down and then you could theoretically just bring him back if there was an injury, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think I'm in on Winslow Perez there, but we'll see.
To me, that's the final position battle, but maybe it's not really a battle at all. We'll see. And then you touched on it with Reese Olson. There's really only one potentially opening in the starting rotation. Probably it's the 5th starter. We know the first 4. And if Olson is healthy, I'm assuming he's going to have that. But if he's not healthy, then it becomes Drew Anderson, Troy Melton. Is there a dark horse candidate there where somebody like Troy Watson or Ty Madden comes in there and takes the job? Or, can't really forget about Kyler Montero too. He's pitched probably the 3rd most innings as a starter over the last 2 years. So I'm interested to see what happens there if, something goes wrong, like you said, any injury to that top 5. And then, the final battles are basically, I think there are 4 openings in the bullpen.
Yeah, the way that I view that with the bullpen is Kenley Jansen is locked in, Kyle Finnegan is locked in, Will Vest is locked in, Tyler Holton is locked in. I think Brant Herter is locked in. I think the big question is going to be, do the Tigers want to take 3 lefty relievers or 2 lefty relievers? And we know the 2 are going to be Tyler Holton and Brant Herter. So yeah, that would leave 3 spots. So maybe it's 3, maybe it's 4, depending on if you want to count Brant Herter as a lock or not. Brennan Hanafy is who I have. Kyler Montero is another name that I have. And then Drew Summers is the last guy that I have in the bullpen. And I think if the Tigers do want to carry 3 lefties, I mean, there are a ton of names who are going to be in the hunt there for that final spot. Like if you're looking at who are potential lefty relievers who could fill that role, I mean, the list quite literally is pretty long. And it went from at the beginning of the offseason not being a long list to now you have Emmanuel DeJesus, Sean Gunther, Bailey Horn, Brian Sammons, Drew Summers. And now you have a new name in Connor Pilkington. So there are a lot of left-handed options for this bullpen. I think that could probably be the biggest bullpen battle to watch. I mean, we'll see what happens with Brennan Hanafy and Kader Montero and where do they end up. But I do think if they do take a 3rd lefty reliever, who is that guy going to be? I think that'll be a storyline to watch all spring. All right, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're joined by Lance Brozdowski, the player development analyst for the Marquee Sports Network, to talk all things Tigers pitchers as spring training gets underway. Everyone, I'd like to welcome Lance Brozdowski, the player development analyst for Marquee Sports Network, to the Days of Our podcast. Now for the 3rd time, there's nobody better at breaking down pitchers, so we're stoked to have him on the show as pitchers and catchers are reporting to spring training. Lance, thank you for joining me on this very important week.
Absolutely, man. I didn't realize this was my 3rd time. I thought this was my 2nd time, so you're breaking news to me here, which is lovely. Time flies, man, I guess.
Yeah, you are a 3rd time visitor of the Days of Our podcast. We love having you on. Look, before we get into the general outlook of the rotation, before we get into the individuals, can I get your reaction to the Tigers signing left-hander Framber Valdez in free agency? 3 years, $115 million with an opt-out clause after the 2nd season. It's been exactly 6 days since that happened. What did you think about it then? And what do you think about it now?
Yeah, it's fascinating to see. I think the consensus among media and analysts and everything, when at the beginning of the offseason, when everyone was trying to ascertain what these contract values would look like, you pushed, Ranger Suarez, Framber Valdez, Don't Cease into the 5-year plus window. But that was with the acknowledgement that every single one of those contracts is probably not going to look good in the final couple of years. So I always thought in any of these cases that the way they would get done is just finding the team that makes itself comfortable with the 4th, 5th, 6th year on a guy like this, where it's probably not worth spending $30 million a year on a 37-year-old Framber, But if you could somehow convince the organization to do that, then sure, it looks fine. Because as long as the production up front makes sense from a value perspective, you could pay off the contract in a couple of years. So they threaded an interesting needle here where they kicked up the AAV and basically lopped off the end of the contract. So they mitigate themselves on the risk side of things. Now I guess the danger becomes whether that 3rd year is one where he can actually recoup the value of it. So I still think there is pressure on the front of this contract for him to be good, especially at that $38 million AAV. But I'm surprised no other team went 5 for $150. because I don't really think he'll make that compelling of a case after the end of the third year to be another contract guy, to make another $30 million a year. I highly doubt that. So I think it's interesting that teams and players have kind of globbed around this idea of really kicking up the AAV when the market is somewhat uncertain on a specific player. We saw this with Kyle Tucker, and now we see it again with Framber.
Where do you think the 1-2 punch of Tarik Skubal and Framber Valdez stacks up across baseball? And is it safe to call them the best 1-2 punch, or should we consider some combination of Garrett Crochet, Ranger Suarez, Sonny Gray with the Red Sox, Yoshinobu Yamamoto and Blake Snell with the Dodgers, some combination of Zach Wheeler, Christopher Sanchez, Jesus Luzardo, Aaron Nola with the Phillies, or Dylan Cease and Kevin Gausman with the Blue Jays? Like, there are a lot of really good 1-2 punches out there. So where do you think the Skubal-Valdez tandem stacks up?
Yeah, actually, I didn't look at combined projected WAR here to give you a very analytical answer, but I do think it's got to be up there purely from the standpoint that Skubal is projected as, I think, by pretty much every outlet as the number one pitcher. And oftentimes it's a decent gap. It's like a half WAR right around that margin between him and Paul Skeens or whoever else is ranked too. I love the Wheeler-Christopher Sanchez combo. Yamamoto-Snell makes a lot of sense too. But I mean, in both those cases, Snell with some injury history and Zach Wheeler coming off thoracic outlet, you could argue that if you're projecting raw innings, I think Skubal and Framber would be the two you'd push to the highest total, which would definitely give them an advantage on the WAR side of things. So yeah, I will agree with you. I think this is the best 1-2 punch, not considering the third piece of any of these specific rotations we're talking about. But this to me feels like the one, and I think there's arguments for the Dodgers and the Phillies and some other teams, but definitely they have a really strong case, and I think I would make that case.
So if this really is the best 1-2 punch in baseball, what do you think about the Tigers' rotation depth as a whole heading into the 2026 season? Assuming everyone is healthy for this exercise, Tarik Skubal, Framber Valdez, Jack Flaherty, Casey Mize, Reese Olson, Drew Anderson, and Troy Melton. Those are 7 names. Do you think the Tigers right there have enough quantity and quality among those rotation options to have a successful 2026?
I do, yeah. I think they do. I think health is the key point there. I think I saw you report the other day that Reese Olson may not start the season on time, which seems to be this recurring thing of him running into injury stuff. So, I mean, I feel like you already slashed his projection. If you were pegging him for 130, you'd probably pull it down to 120, 110. You just don't know from a variance standpoint what he's going to run into, which means you probably need Troy Melton, who I think is one of the more exciting pitchers in baseball that I do feel like the league as a whole has overlooked continually. I mean, he checks every single possible box from a pitching prospect standpoint. He's got the release traits. He throws hard. It's multiple shapes. He has an attack versus lefties and righties, multiple breaking balls, everything there lines up. And I've just been waiting for them to give this guy a shot. When they signed Framber, I was a bit worried. I was like, cool, now Melton's the odd man out, and we're going to do this whole carousel again where I'm hoping that he actually gets 140 innings. But I think he's a fascinating pitcher. I think Casey Mize is a free agent coming up after 2026. So, the long-term picture of Troy Melton on this team, I think makes a lot of sense. I guess I'm just a little greedy and I want it earlier. But I think it's good depth. Mize, I like a bit. I'm uncertain what the true upside is there. But again, contract year guys tend to pitch more innings or stay on the field longer. We see on the position player side of things a lot that they tend to be a bit more aggressive on the base paths. They understand it's a contract year. It took a while for Casey Mize to get to this point where he posted a 2+4 season, coming off being what everybody thought was a consensus ace out of the 2018 draft. And now we kind of got a glimpse of it, and we'll see if he could repeat it. Because if he does, then I think a lot of teams can tell themselves a story that he's worth, maybe low 20s, mid 20s a year in terms of AAV. But I think it's good depth. Flaherty, Olson, Melton, Drew Anderson's kind of an interesting pitcher. It's a good rotation. I think it's probably squarely top half. I haven't really pieced it together in terms of where it ranks among the league, but I do think the Tigers just do a good job on the pitching side. They have really sharp minds there. Robin Lund's a dude I think is maybe not a rising star in the industry because he's already a star in the industry, but I think he does a great job coming from Iowa. And I think there's a lot of sharp minds there that can make guys better. And they have a very deliberate approach from we need guys who have weapons to each handedness, which I think helps a lot in terms of matchups.
The Tigers have 3 starters in contract years: Tarik Skubal, Jack Flaherty, and Casey Mize. Let's start with the big name. Tarik Skubal, he is a back-to-back Cy Young winner. He won his arbitration hearing to make $32 million in 2026, where he's going to go for a Cy Young three-peat. He led the AL with a 2.39 ERA in 2024. Then he led the AL again with a 2.21 ERA in 2025. What are your thoughts on Skubal heading into the 2026 season?
He's an unbelievable pitcher. I'm fascinated to see him throw here. I think he has a really good chance of getting a third Cy. I think the thing that's interesting to me, it seems like among these elite guys, and I go back to like DeGrom being a guy who just absolutely dominated for an extended period of time, obviously running into injuries along the way. And DeGrom gained a lot of velocity throughout his career. It seemed like every single year he was jumping up. This happened, I think, with Zach Wheeler as well. And we're seeing with Skubal now, where every year since 2022, it's not that large of a sample compared to like a DeGrom, but we're seeing him tick up and up and up. Even if it's by subtle margins, he was more like 95 a couple years ago. Now he's sitting like close to 98. And we saw in season as well, he had like a little bit of a peak early in like May, June. And the larger point here to me that jumps out is if you look year over year between 2024 and 2025, he started cutting his fastball a bit more. And what this means essentially is if you think of the concept of like pure backspin, so like purely backspinning a fastball where it's literally the spin of the ball is perfectly aligned with like 12 o'clock on a clock face. Think of that. Now think of like offsetting the ball slightly, because the hand position you need to get that true backspin is almost with your palm facing you, like you're looking directly at the back of your palm. Now turn it so your palm's more like away from you, or excuse me, the back of your hand. You're looking at the back of your hand for that true backspin. As you turn your hand a bit and you see more the side of your hand looking from your perspective, I think that is essentially what cutting the ball is. You're getting to the side of the ball slightly more at release. And as a result of that, we see his efficiency, and the arm side movement is probably the most obvious way to identify this, is down about 3 inches on his fastball. So it's an interesting note. I texted a couple of people this morning. I didn't get a response, so maybe I'm not too popular in the industry. Or no, it's the reality is that everybody's in spring training, and I usually get the responses later in the day now. But I don't exactly know why this occurs. I think it's perhaps a byproduct of something earlier in the chain. It's not just like Skubal one day is like, oh, I want my hand to be around the ball more, so I'm going to start cutting the ball. I think perhaps it's tied to the velocity side of things. Like as he's gained velocity, maybe something's happened in his lower body or how he moves such that now when his hand is getting to his release point, it's a little more turned away from him, if that makes any sense. And we're talking very, very subtle margins. But stuff like this matters from like a raw stuff standpoint and how it affects ball flight. Another way you could look at this just from how is this actually affecting him? If you just look at his fastball location to right-handed hitters between 24 and 25, 2024, he was a little bit more away from righties. In 2025, he's a little more like directly up in the zone. So that's, again, the byproduct of the fact that the ball's not moving to his arm side as much. So I can idea it from like okay, this is happening with the pitcher. The why portion here is interesting. I haven't gotten a chance to talk to him. I'm not sure if you have, but I would theorize that something perhaps in his training changed from I want to be more explosive or change how I'm moving from my lower half. And we're seeing that manifest in velocity, but the byproduct is now he's slightly more around the ball at release. It's not a bad thing. It's just one of those things that's interesting. And again, if we go on this theme of like, is he going to continue adding velocity? Does he sit 98 plus this year, which would be a bit of a tick up from last year? If that happens, then maybe he cuts the ball even more. The ball's even more in on right-handed hitters. And the question becomes like, how does that actually affect his approach? Or is it actually an advantage for him? Is it an advantage that he's looking slightly different as he progresses through his career, which is maybe a subtle way for him to like stave off any subtle regression among players or hitters as right-handed hitters, specifically getting more comfortable seeing how his ball moves and his changeup and everything else. So I'm not sure if you've asked him. I was going to spin this back on you and see if he said anything to you, or if you talked to him as to like why this is occurring, because he has to have a thought. I mean, I'm very confident the pitching department knows what's going on here, is aware of it.
I have not asked him about cutting the fastball yet. I'm actually still trying to like even understand that myself, because I hear it talked about quite a bit. And you've talked about it as well with, pitchers in the free agent market who cut their fastball. And there are teams that like pitchers who cut their fastball. Why do teams like that? What advantage does that give a pitcher, generally speaking, whether they're trying to do it or they're not? What is the benefit to cutting the fastball?
It really comes down to diversity of repertoire. We're running into this era of baseball where everyone's throwing more pitches, especially left-handed hitters. Exactly. I think it was Stephen Nesbitt of The Athletic who had a piece last year about how lefties are dominating, but they're also throwing a lot more pitches. In the past, you think of a lefty as like a fastball changeup type. Doesn't really need a breaking ball. Some guys start to add breaking balls and sliders. Now we're getting to the point where a lot of lefties are throwing sinkers, Skubal included. Crochet is another good example of a guy who evolved into that. Multiple sliders, changeup, curveball, like getting to the point where they're throwing 5 or 6 pitches. And generally, when you're around the side of the ball, like we're talking about, you're cutting the ball more. What that results in is a better ability to get to different breaking ball shapes. The limitation you'll often see with guys who don't get to the side of the ball. So I was just looking at Tyler Mahle, so he's the name I'm going to think of, but he's a really good example of he does not get to the side of the ball. He's perfectly behind the ball at release. He's almost the absolute ceiling in terms of how behind the ball you can get to create that like raw backspin. And he's a guy that like, he's just not going to throw multiple breaking balls and they're not going to be good. If he lands on one, then that's fantastic. But pushing him to like 3 or 4 is just not going to happen. So that's essentially to me what it comes down to. Teams like this because we're getting to the point where I think this idea of having like 3 breaking balls, 2 breaking balls, getting to as many pitches as possible, having as many weapons to attack hitters as possible is the new wave, especially with pitch design, especially with the idea that we can make pretty much every pitch solid, good, above average. Like the days of, this guy just needs a changeup to be better and he can't figure out his changeup are kind of gone. Like everybody's throwing some kind of changeup, whether it's a kick variety or true split or, changing orientation. Like we understand a lot now about how seams interact with air as they move to the plate. And that gets you to the movement profile you're trying to achieve. So a longer answer than I wanted there, but that's the reality of it. Is like get to the side of the ball, can throw more pitches. I think it's as simple as that. And that's why a lot of teams prize it. But I think Skubal's case is maybe a little bit different, where it's like, I don't envision him adding a ton of other pitches. Like he already has a deep enough repertoire to dominate the league. He doesn't need like a sweeper or anything else in there. He can if he wants. I just don't think it's totally necessary. So I'm fascinated to see like, and also understand from him like why it's occurring. My thesis right now would be that it's connected to the velocity gain. It's just he's throwing harder and there's something in his body that's moved differently and that's resulting in his hand being in a different spot at release. And I think I did a poor job of explaining because I was talking about the front of the hand of the palm. But again, like pure backspin, like push your hand out in front of you, you're looking at the back of your hand. That's like the Tyler Mahle. And as you cut the ball more, start to look at like the side, like turn your thumb to your face ever so slightly. It's an exaggeration, but think of that being the point of release as opposed to you're looking at the back of your hand. It's very subtle. It's probably more like, like a 10, 20 degree actual orientation difference. And it also could come down to as much as like finger pressure to cut the ball. But a lot of guys who cut the ball are just on the side of the ball a bit more. And that results in the ability to create more shapes.
Continuing down the list, the Tigers' number 2 starter, Framber Valdez. We've talked about the addition, but what can you tell us about how he has been so durable and successful throughout his career, especially dating back to 2022?
Yeah, I mean, he's a funky dude. I think he just has a combination of really interesting release traits. He's super far over towards the first base side and he throws sinkers to right-handed hitters. It's generally a bit taboo from like, this pitch shouldn't be thrown to that handedness because that hand usually does pretty well against it. But there are certain iterations of guys, especially those who are able to create a ton of drop on their sinker as he does from his slot that just succeed doing this. So I think he has a bit of this like visual advantage where if you're a right-handed hitter, it's almost like he's throwing sinkers at you, but then they just like drift back to the bottom of the zone. So he gets a lot of called strikes on them. That puts him in count lever spots or advantageous count spots where, he's ahead in the count. A lot doesn't really walk a lot of guys. Or if guys are swinging at that pitch, they're generally not barreling it. He's posted a barrel rate below 7% in 4 of the last 5 seasons. 8% is about average there. So he's hard. And that's really good for starting pitchers as well. I think that number on the barrel rate side is slightly higher than it would be for relievers. Versus righties, he mixes as he gets deep in count situations off that sinker. If you didn't put the ball on the ground, you didn't take it for a strike and he gets you in a 2-strike spot, he's able to put you away with curveball change. And versus lefties, he's primarily like sinker curve. So, it really revolves to me around his ability to create drop and then spin a good breaking ball. So I think he's pretty solid. I will point out, like, his second half approach wasn't as sharp from a right-handed hitter standpoint specifically. I was talking about how, like, he does a good job keeping that sinker down in the zone. From what I saw, and if you look at his heat maps, like, the sinker started to kick up a little bit and end up more middle. I'm not entirely sure. Location is something that's highly variable, especially start to start. So when you start to parse it down into small samples and look at even a half of a season, which I thought was enough to, like, say that the sinker was more up in the zone and it may have affected him. But if you look at, like, a couple starts or so, like, it's not totally surprising to see difference in location. But if you see a large enough sample, that ball being up in the zone, you start to wonder, like, okay, what changed there? Why is it up? Like, he's definitely going to give up more damage on that sinker to righties if it's up. So I wonder if it's as simple to the Tigers as just like getting him back to what he's always done, which is like, please keep that sinker down to righties. And then from there, everything else will work. Like, I don't really think he's that complex of a pitcher from like he has 6 weapons of attack to each handedness and, he can do whatever he wants. He's just working off his advantage visually as a pitcher. And I think that's enough for him to be a guy that you just project really strongly, especially because even if he's not going to strike out the world like Skubal, it's enough from a contact neutralizing standpoint that he's just never going to give up a lot of damage, especially in that park. So I think it's a good fit. Like, I think he's a good pitcher. And I think that even if it's more quantity than quality, like on a per inning basis, maybe he's not Tarik Skubal, but if he's 180 innings, 190 innings again of what he's done over the last couple seasons, even if it's like a 3.5 ERA, he's going to be good. He's going to end up a top 20, 25 pitcher in baseball, probably even better than that. And that's what you're paying for at nearly $40 million a year.
For Jack Flaherty, there have been ups and downs in his 2 years with the Tigers. A lot of ups in 2024, a lot of downs in 2025. What are your thoughts on him heading into 2026, where I think if you ask anybody around here, nobody really knows what to expect from Jack Flaherty?
Yeah, he's an interesting one because I noticed like his results were pretty bad last year with like near 4.7 ERA, but the underlying stuff wasn't dramatically different. And by underlying, I just mean a lot of the times when you project out ERA, the simplest way to do it is just to focus on do you allow barrels? Do you allow homers? Do you strike out guys? Do you walk guys? And some iteration of all those three gets you to what the pitcher controls more than ball and play. There, of course, are guys that do a great job controlling ball and play. We're just talking about one in Framber Valdez. But with Flaherty, the only thing that really jumps out to me is that the walk rate ticked up from like 6% to 9%. And that is enough to like push the peripherals up a bit. I would say it's not enough to push him into like the ERA he ended up with. So I think he got a bit unlucky. But if you dig in more, the fascinating thing to me, walk rate up, you would assume versus some specific handedness of hitter, he was like in the zone less, which wasn't actually the case. He actually was in the zone more versus left-handed hitters, which is the handedness that he's always, it seems like, had a little bit more trouble with. And I find that interesting because it's odd to me that if you're walking more guys and the K- walk really dropped versus lefties, when I was like sorting through him, I was like, okay, I'm expecting to see worse early pitch success when he faces left-handed hitters. Like he's just not in zone as much and he's falling behind as a result of that. He's getting beat. What it seems like happened is just everybody got more comfortable with his slider. The whiff there fell from 37% to 26%. The chase fell from about 38 to 32. So it's now, from a result standpoint, a below average pitch versus that handedness, which is probably the primary thing that the pitching department's looking at with him and going, why was this any different? Because there's really nothing different about his locations. There's nothing different about the movement, nothing different about his release. Like it just seems like some of the balls that he let leak to his glove side and get more in zone got clipped. Maybe that's it. But I do think the underlying stuff on the whiff and chase side with the sliders enough to wonder like why that happened. His approach is kind of interesting to lefties too. He's like purely fastball away, and then he kind of like works off that line that pitch creates to go down the zone. So he doesn't really throw up. He doesn't really throw in to lefties. He's kind of just like hunting this outer third, trying to get called strikes on the fastball and then like get you to swing below the zone on his breaking balls. And he's, I imagine, visually hoping that you're really having a tough time as a hitter distinguishing between the fastball and the breakers. But yeah, the big thing here is just like what happened to the slider. I don't know if I have a theory behind like why it wasn't as good, but that's the clear thing that jumps out to me as like, hey, if you fix this, I think we're just going to see what he did in 22 to 24, which were all pretty good iterations of starting pitcher. That's probably like a 3 or 4 in a rotation. I know he's went through some repertoire changes when he was like with the Dodgers back to the Tigers. Everyone seems to play between the slider and the curveball. It seems like the Tigers have mostly even out the distribution of those two pitches. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure what happened to the slider. This would be another one that I'd be curious to ask him. Like, hey, as you're evaluating your slider performance of lefties last year, like, did you think it was good? You know what I mean? And like, can you make it better? Because I imagine the answer is going to be no. So that's like, I mean, you're in clubhouses a ton more than I am, but a lot of the time, as my analysis has progressed and stuff, I'm always more interested in like the player perspective on these things. Sometimes, they're just not that insightful, and that's totally understandable. But I'm also fascinated a lot of the time by like what the pitcher thinks. Like, does Flaherty think it's a problem? Like, if he thinks his field was exactly the same on a slider last year and the results were worse, then like you probably have even more of a problem. You know what I mean? He's like, he thinks the pitch is good. It didn't perform as well. Are you just assuming it goes back to being an amazing pitch? You can make that bet. Is that the most advantageous bet for him to be a very good pitcher? Probably not. So, I mean, maybe it's another angle where you go to the coach and you ask like Lund or someone else, like, what do you make of the slider performance to lefties? Because like I'm fascinated on whether that is just a blip. That's often the hard thing to determine, I think, with baseball is like, was that thing we just saw for that large sample a blip? And can we bet on it being a blip, or do we need to adjust something such that if it is a blip again, we are screwed? So I don't know. I'm fascinated to see Flaherty. I think he reverts back to being more like a true like 4.41 ERA guy, like right in that window where projections are, which again is probably a cop out where I'm splitting the difference between where he was in 23 and 24 and where he was last year. But a lot of the times that's like kind of where you project a guy, of course, with like a decent range around what the actual results end up being at the end of the year.
Again, we are with Lance Brozdowski, the player development analyst for Marquee Sports Network. He is one of the best, and we're going to keep rolling. Same thing, but Casey Mize. In 2025, he had a 2.63 ERA in his first 15 starts, then a 5.54 ERA in his final 13 starts. What version of Casey Mize do you think will show up in 2026, or is it going to be somewhere in between?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that early season stuff mostly relates to the fact that if you look at his approach to righties in 24, something needed to change. I think, didn't he go to Driveline, if I'm remembering correctly? That seems familiar.
And he picked up like 3 different breaking balls.
Exactly. Yeah. So he like kind of played with the slider and changed the sweeper, changed the curve into a sweeper from what I could tell. But, he's more of a guy, we're talking about like this cutting the fastball. He's a guy who gets behind the ball pretty well. So the sweeper shape he's creating isn't like this massive lateral offering that dominates hitters. It's kind of like more of a small shape, but it works versus righties. And you saw the improvement in his righty approach between 24 and 25. And he did a great job. He did a great job addressing the problem that he had in 24. Primarily with that splitter, he's always going to be a bit better versus left-handed hitters, and we saw that. But I thought he did a really good job against righties. I just wonder whether as he got into the year, everyone started to understand how his plan of attack changed, whereas he had an advantage early, especially with as dramatic of like a flip in the breaking balls and the approach change, throwing on more sinkers than four-seamers than he had in the prior season to righties. When you see that stuff's difficult, I imagine, to anticipate as hitters, especially early in the year. But once you get like a 5 to 10 start sample, like that's all baked into the advance report, whereas you're not relying on 24 anymore. But I imagine early in the year, it was like, we expect him to be what he was in 2024. And even if you advance scout him or whatever team was facing him had a pro department that happened to see him and was like, hey, he's got different breaking balls and he's throwing more sinker to righties. I just think it takes some time for hitters to like believe that, if that makes any sense. And I think as a result of that, like he had an advantage early and that advantage went away late. So I'm fascinated to see what changes again. Is it just even more sinker to righties? Is there a differential in the breaking balls? Does he add back like more of a slower curve to help against lefties or more against lefties? He's pretty good against lefties already. But the righty approach is always going to be like how do we optimize this as much as possible for him because the split's so good? I mean, his lefty approach is pretty much like, I'm going to rail four-seamers at the top of the zone and throw a split down. And like, for the most part, that works for a lot of guys, especially with the fastball quality he has and the split quality. So the question is really just righties. So I guess to answer your question, I will split the difference again and play Switzerland and assume that he's somewhere in the middle of those two outcomes. But I do think he has, again, I'm as much as I'm a data nerd, like I also understand like the soft side of things, soft skill side. Like he's got to know he's going into the contract year. So like if there's ever a season for him to like lock in, be up a tick, look really strong, mix everything in beautifully to righties and really dominate lefties from like a four-seam split standpoint, this is the year to do it because the end of the year, if someone wants to give him 6 for 150 or something along those lines, like he can maybe make that if he has another really good season this year. I'm not entirely sure what he projects right now from a dollar value standpoint. It's gonna, I think, rely heavily on how he does this year. But I could totally see him being like a low 20s AAV guy for multiple years if a team likes the mix, which again, I think he did a great job adjusting to right-handed hitters with.
What do you think about Reese Olson? He has to stay healthy. That is the first thing. He has suffered from shoulder injuries in each of the past 2 seasons. Let's assume that he's healthy for this, even though we're hearing some concerning things. Does a healthy Reese Olson have as much upside as anyone not named Tarik Skubal in this rotation? Or are we not viewing Reese Olson that way anymore, considering the fact that he's been hurt and he's been around for a little bit now and hasn't really developed into that true frontline starter?
I think Melton has more upside purely from like a fastball quality standpoint. Olson's kind of fascinating. I didn't look to see. I don't think I have time right now to grab it, but he doesn't throw like anything in the zone. He's like one of the lowest zone rates, I imagine, among starting pitchers. And yet he's not like walking the world. Like he's heavily, heavily reliant on chase on his secondaries, which is a fair way for him to pitch because they're really good, slider and the change. And the injury stuff, so if we just throw that out the window, assume he's healthy and he throws like 100, and let's say he missed a little bit of time. Let's say he throws like 140, 150 innings in the rotation. I think he'll be a very good pitcher on a per inning basis. I would guess the walk rate starts to inflate a bit, but I do find sometimes with these guys, there's a point where if you're in the zone so little as he is, I'm wondering when the point is where hitters start to lay off him more and just take and like make him get to 1-1 spots, 1-2 spots, 2-strike spots. And then from there, you're kind of messed up as a hitter because the secondaries are so good that he's just going to dominate you in 2-strike situations. But that early count spot is weird with him because he's not in the zone a lot. And I think as a hitter, you could take more advantage of that than hitters have, even if it means not really barreling him a ton because he is tough to barrel. But I think he's a good pitcher. Like, I think he's a very odd iteration of a starting pitcher, if that makes any sense. I wouldn't say he's like Freddie Peralta's a poor comp. Freddie Peralta's another guy who's like not in the zone a ton as a starting pitcher. But it works for him because he's so up in the zone with his four-seam fastball, it'll probably artificially depress the the zone rate on the four-seam fastball specifically. But yeah, I think Reese Olson's a good pitcher on a per inning basis. The obvious concern here is just the injury side of things. I just find it odd he's in the zone so little. And I think that will definitely limit his upside. You don't see a lot of like the best pitchers in baseball working out of the zone as much as he does. The best are the ones that are in zone and able to miss in zone. You think of like Tarik Skubal and some of these other guys, or Framber Valdez is a good example where it's, he can throw sinkers in the zone and not walk anybody and still generate really good results. I would challenge Reese Olson to be like, how do you look if you're in the zone more? And I don't know if the answer is great because the fastball quality is more fine. He's really just heavily relying on secondaries. It's funny because I know in the past the Tigers have used like this opener-y strategy where you're like throwing multiple dudes, piggybacking guys together. And Olson is a guy that I'm somewhat surprised they've like true started as much as they have, because he's a guy to me that I almost wonder whether you don't let him turn over lineups, whether he's better, because it's going to be tough for hitters to like adjust to how out of the zone he is in his secondary shapes. Such that if you roll him for like 2 to 3 innings, he's like the perfect pitcher for that to me. Because like the secondaries are so good, he could rip those a ton. Like he could probably throw like 65% non-fastballs and succeed. But the problem is as he gets through the lineup more, like I just imagine those pitches from a quality standpoint are going to decay or hitters will get more comfortable. And as a result of that, what you see more early count is him throwing some four seam and some sink to like mitigate the risk that he is deep in the game and can't throw anything because the hitter saw everything he's already thrown a ton. So it's funny to me that like he hasn't been the guy they've used in like these short stints. And I wonder whether that's like the ultimate outcome for him. And I almost think that's like the perfect fit for him, is just to be more of a multi-inning reliever. So we'll see exactly what happens this year. Health's a big factor, but yeah, I'm interested in him. I think he's a good pitcher. I just think the upside's a bit more limited than it is with a guy like Melton.
I promise you, we are going to talk about your boy, Troy Melton. But before we do that, Drew Anderson, he added a kick change over the past 2 seasons in Korea. The Tigers signed him for 1 year, $7 million with a $10 million club option. Is the kick change real? And how do you think his stuff will play as a starter in the big leagues, which is a much higher competition level than the KBO league in Korea?
Yeah, it's a good question. I often have trouble. I'm often a bit more pessimistic on these guys coming over from KBO specifically because of the hitter quality. And it also seems like we are seeing a lot of kick changeups. Like the kick changeup fad was definitely prevalent in baseball in the major leagues last year. Cody Ponce is another guy who added a kick changeup. It seems like everybody over there is just adding a kick changeup. And for whatever reason or not, like it seems like all these are really successful. Like he had a ton of swing miss on that pitch Drew Anderson did over in the KBO. Like it was up around like 60% swing miss, which is like crazy. I mean, the average changeup's going to miss around like 35% of bats from every time you swing. How often do you swing through it? So he got a ton of swing miss on that. I think that will back up slightly. Like I'm fine assuming it's a good pitch, but I don't think like there are a lot of pitchers in baseball where they add a kick change in MLB and it's like, oh wow, look at this guy just like completely is like so much better as a pitcher. I'm more interested in what the Tigers do from a breaking ball standpoint with him. He has like this big, really sweepy lateral curve. That's a decent pitch, but he didn't throw a lot of slider cutter or any shorter breaking ball variant over in KBO a lot. He did have a couple. I think he flashed like a sweeper and he flashed like a cutter, but he wasn't throwing them to the point where you'd consider them like actual weapons in his repertoire. He was mostly, I mean, he was like 65% fastball sinker. And there was good separation between those pitches, which gets to a larger theme of like, I do think the Tigers care about multiple fastballs and getting in the zone a lot. So he fits that mold. But I am fascinated to see how he does versus right-handed hitters specifically from a swing miss standpoint, and whether he's like a reverse splits guy because of how good the kick change is and because of the fact that like I imagine he needs some kind of shorter breaking ball for righties to succeed. So I'm like cautiously optimistic he's good, and good in the sense that he outperforms the contract. If he ends up with like a 4.4 ERA, gives you like 120, 130 innings, like it's probably worth the amount they're paying him, especially with the incentives attached and such. So it's a good depth move, and there's a little bit of upside in there. I'm fascinated to see what the Tigers think from like a repertoire standpoint and what they look at over in the KBO and go, okay, like this was successful, but probably not going to work at MLB, so we have to do X, Y, and Z. And to me, the X, Y, and Z is figuring out the shorter breaking balls. So good pitcher, don't think there's like crazy untapped upside, but I do think some of the adjustments he made make sense over in KBO, and he will be better. How much better is a great question. I guess by saying that I think he's like a 4.3, 4.4 ERA guy, like I'm assuming that it's not like the breakout candidate of 2026. But yeah, I think it was a good signing for the price. Like I think that, yeah, I'm fine with it. I don't think this is like a guy that's like, oh my God, he's got 150 innings of a 3.5 ERA and he's the best pitcher in baseball. I just think it's more like a depth signing, can cover some innings, can use him in multiple roles, and that's fine. For $7 and $10 million, that's perfect.
I promised Troy Melton, so let's get into it. He has the foundational fastball. He has the mindset to handle adversity. He has MLB experience now. What is the long-term upside for Troy Melton? And if the Tigers have to choose, for whatever reason, What do you think is better for him in 2026 to start the season? Starter in AAA or reliever in MLB?
So it's a good question. I mean, I think the best path here is to start him. And I imagine what you're going to hear in spring is like we built him up as the starting pitcher, but they seem to be somewhat hesitant to let him go deep into games. So as much as maybe he's built up as a starting pitcher, I also then want to see him like actually throw deep into games. So if they will let him go 5, 6, 7 innings in the minors at AAA and not like blow out his arm early in the season, like he's actually built up from a workload standpoint from what he did in the offseason to do that, then to me, that's the best route. By far, I think he's a very good pitcher. And if they view him as the future piece of the rotation, then I could imagine this being somewhat of a grooming year for him, where it's like, we have Framber, we have these other guys, we have Drew Anderson who could cover some innings. You know, if he starts at AAA and then we need him apart from, or say like Drew Anderson's not good or whatever early, and then you actually need a fifth starter because Reese Olson doesn't finish the beginning of the season, doesn't start at the beginning of the season, then yeah, like I think I want him to max out his innings as safely as possible, pitch as deep into the game as possible, and like truly view him as like a starting pitcher, bona fide starting pitcher heading into 2027, especially with the depth they've added between Drew and Framber. Maybe that's like the path that makes the most sense from like how is Troy Melton the best pitcher for the next 5 years, 6 years they have him? That's the way to do it. Now, selfishly, I would prefer him just to throw 150 innings this year at the biggest as a starting pitcher because I think he's very good. And I think he's already good enough to do that. I don't really think there's anything beyond him just needing to go deeper into games and seeing how he fares third time through than just him doing that. Like, I don't really think there's repertoire adjustments to occur here. Like, it's deep enough already. Force deep sink slider to lefties. These massive zone rates versus them. Left-handed hitters, it's 4 pitches. Really even distribution between like cutter slider change there. Like, it's a really good repertoire. Like, I don't think there's anything that needs to occur from that standpoint. And I just think that he lines up with the Tigers' approach to have weapons versus lefties and righties. It's really a matter of just let it ride. Let him throw and see how he does. And if they're hesitant again this year to do that, then like, I don't know, like, is there something they see in the underlying that makes them hesitant to think that he's actually a starting pitcher long term? I don't see that, just from my public perception, but I also we don't get biomech data or any of the stuff on the public side to understand more the inner workings of like why perhaps they would limit him and have him throw 2 to 3 innings for extended periods of time. But I'm hoping they were aggressive with his workload this offseason and he's built up such that he can throw like 150 innings. Because like, I think he's a very good pitcher. I think he could be, maybe this is bullish, but I think he could end up being like a top 30. Now, top 30 is probably a little aggressive, like top 40, 50 pitcher in baseball. And the upside's greater than that. But I think like if you're trying to peg like a good outcome for him, a little above average good outcome, I think it's like top 50 in baseball. And that's like really good. That's like a 2-WAR pitcher every year, 2.5. And there aren't a lot of guys that get to that, especially as a pitching prospect that I think was continually overlooked. Everyone was talking about Jonah Tong and Trey Savage and like all these other guys. And Melton's mix is like better than both those guys, in my opinion. Now, he's not as distinct from perhaps a release rate standpoint or some of the stuff that Z Savage and Tong do from like a top pitching prospect standpoint. But for me in my ranks, when I put together top pitching prospects, I think I had him around like the 20s, a little bit higher than that. I had Z Savage. I was always the low man on Z Savage. I had him around like 15, I think, which again looks really dumb right now. So maybe don't listen to me on Troy Melton, but I do think he's a very good pitcher. He checks every box. It's mixed. It's good release traits. He throws hard. He throws strikes. I just have a really hard time seeing how this guy's in like some kind of good starting pitcher for a long time.
Last question before we get you out of here. I want to hear what you think about the top 3 relievers in the bullpen. Kenley Jansen, Kyle Finnegan, Will Vest. Do you think those 3 provide enough firepower for high leverage situations? Or are you concerned because none of those guys miss bats at an elite rate, which was a problem for the Tigers bullpen last season?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, if you made me guess like where the saves distribution goes, like I don't think Kenley would have signed with a team if he didn't have a shot at saves. I mean, he's like, was he 24 off 500? So like, I think the mode here is that the Tigers probably align with the idea that we just want our best pitchers throwing in the most high leverage spots. And as a result of that, you're going to see a lot of Finnegan and Vest versus the best hitters. And then as a result of that, perhaps Kenley just ends up in the 9th a lot. And that's the perfect fit. Where it's like you have this guy who's hunting 500 saves. That'd be an awesome milestone for him to get to. I'm obviously rooting for that. I think everybody in baseball should be rooting for that. And then Finnegan, they made immediate adjustments with when they got him from the Nationals. The Nationals, I don't think they did a great job from like a optimizing pitcher standpoint, and the Tigers took advantage of that. Immediately, I think just made him objectively better. Stopped throwing the four-seam fastball, throw a bunch more split. It worked. I'm excited to see that over a large sample here as he comes into 2026 and see exactly what the raw results are, because I always theorized that was the move for him to be much better. Vest is fascinating. He's another guy we're talking about, like cutting the ball, very similar to Skubal, where he's starting to get to the side of the ball more. Not entirely sure why, but he has that similar trajectory of like the forcing fastball is a little less arm side movement than they did in 2024. He's really hard to barrel, throws in zone a ton. He doesn't walk anybody. Like he's like, as much as he is like a modern pitcher from like what he does with the ball, I also think he's a fascinating like old school reliever. Like you often hear old school people just go like, I just want a reliever doesn't walk anybody. I was asked like a couple months ago, actually, I remember on the local radio station here in Chicago, like, hey, when you're looking for a reliever, like, what do you want? And I'm like, I just want someone to miss bats, which I know you just said, like the Tigers don't do. But the old school answer there is like, I just want a guy who doesn't walk anybody. And Will Vest kind of does both. He just like is far more on the spectrum of I don't walk anybody, and it's really hard to barrel me. So I can imagine Vest being the guy who lines up versus the best hitters in a lineup. Say you get like 7th, 8th, 9th inning, and they're trying to figure out which relievers to roll out. They're ahead by a run or two. You know, it's going to line up where I think Vest gets the best bats. Finnegan gets like the next pocket or the lefty pocket with his split. And then Jansen just like ends up as the third guy. And I think their bet here, if you have me project saves out, it's probably like 20 for Jansen and like 22 for Vest, and then a couple to Finnegan or something like that. I'm curious to see what projections have. But I do wonder, like, if the Tigers are good early in the year and Jansen ends up with a bunch of saves early, do they just, like, push him into the knife as what I think is probably the objectively worst pitcher? His K rate dropped below 27% for the first time in his career last year. His arm angle is pretty much all over the place every year. He's a fascinating pitcher where it's like one pitch. It's truly like one of the few unicorn pitches in baseball. It's like this weird lift cutter thing that no one else throws. And I'm curious to see if they, like, how disciplined will they be on throwing the best pitcher in the best spot when Kenley Jansen's like 3 saves away from 500 and it's late in the year. And it's like, this dude is like, my personal incentive is just to get 500 saves. And the Tigers are like, we actually don't think you're the best pitcher for this spot. So like, we don't care. Or are they like, you know what, this is a historic milestone and it makes a lot of sense. So let's throw him in that spot. It's not something we're going to know until they actually get to that situation. But I actually want him to save a bunch of games early. Like say he has like 17 saves at the All-Star break or something, where it's just like he just happened to save a bunch of games and the Tigers won a lot of games in the first half. Like, I don't know, man. I'm hunting those 7 saves late in the year if I'm Kenley Jansen. And I don't think I really care what Hinch says. Like, I'm just like, I want to pitch in the knife. I don't care if I'm the worst pitcher for the spot and Vest is better than me. So I don't know. That's a funny like subplot storyline. I'm fascinated to see what the Tigers this year.
So many storylines for 2026. All right, Lance, that is all we have for you. I think we've covered all of the notable Tigers pitchers, both starters and relievers. And there's nobody better at doing this than you. Thank you so much for joining the Days of Roar podcast.
Appreciate you, man.
Hopefully we can do this again at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Take care, man. Thanks for having me.
Everyone, that was Lance Brozdowski, the player development analyst for Marquee Sports Network. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're joined by another special guest to discuss the Framber Valdez signing. Everyone, I'd like to welcome Chandler Rome, the Houston Astros beat writer for The Athletic, to the Days of Roar podcast. He has been here before, and we're pumped to have him back, this time to get some insight into Tigers left-hander Framber Valdez. Chandler, thank you for joining us.
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me.
All right, so first things first, what was your personal reaction when you saw Framber Valdez to the Tigers?
I'll peel the curtain back completely. I was at a very swanky Japanese omakase dinner that night. It's one where you get the 14 courses and you just sit down and they just keep feeding you nigiri and sushi all night. I was there with a couple of friends and I got the alert, and the only thing I had to make sure was like the pre-write that I had saved in our system. I was like, can someone put Tigers and 115 in the placeholders and we're good to go. But yeah, the name caught me off guard a little bit. But I will say this, at the beginning of the offseason, I told a lot of like my friends and people that are in the industry, I thought the Red Sox made a lot of sense for Framber Valdez. And I said, I think it for this reason. Alex Cora is one of the better managers in baseball in terms of being able to handle people, being able to manage people and personalities and be able to get them pulling on the same rope. And Framber needs that sometimes. And I thought it was just kind of a foregone conclusion that a Latino manager of that esteem would be able to do that for Framber. I should have also remembered that AJ Hinch falls into that category as well. So when that all came when I started to think about it from that aspect, I never thought the Tigers would spend that kind of money. I never thought they would be in that sort of realm of paying a pitcher $40 million a year. But it's out there that AJ met with Framber before the deal came to fruition. Doesn't surprise me at all. I think AJ is going to get the best out of Framber, because when you have Framber in the right state of mind, when you have him focused on one thing and one thing only, there are few that are better and there are few that are more durable in the game than him.
Yeah, the Tigers don't have Alex Cora, but they do have Joey Cora, his brother. So maybe that'll help. But also, you mentioned AJ Hinch. How much do you know about Hinch's relationship with Valdez? He watched him come up through the minors, but it was also his manager in the big leagues for a couple of years.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part of all this. And it's something that I'm fascinated to hear AJ's thoughts on once this becomes official and everything. Framber Valdez was an absolute unmitigated disaster for the 2 years that AJ managed him in Houston, to the point where his spot on the 40-man roster was very much in peril. He was on the roster when AJ managed in 18 and 19 for no other reason than to be the long guy, to be the mop-up guy in the bullpen that if a game got sideways, they could just throw his arm out and send him out to the minors that afternoon or the next day. The rise, you are looking at a completely different pitcher, a completely different human, a completely different everything than the Framber Valdez that AJ Hinch managed in Houston to the one he's now going to manage in Detroit. Obviously, everyone only looks at the 2 years in the big leagues that AJ managed him and say there's not that big of a sample size, but you got to remember he had him in spring training too. He was a non-roster invite and in big league camp for a lot of AJ's tenure. So he knows more about him maybe than just the Baseball Reference would lead you on to believe. But, AJ's now had to see him from afar. He's had to see him from across the way. He beat him in a pretty consequential game last year at Dyken Park in the first game of the wild card series. So he knows Framber. He knows what makes him tick. He knows some of the things he has to do. But I say that, and I can't stress to you enough how different of a pitcher and person Framber is now than the one that AJ had in Houston a few years ago.
That's interesting. There's one other sort of partial connection there with the Tigers. They have Jake Rogers as a catcher, and Jake Rogers, of course, came up through the Astros system way back in the day. And I was looking, and he did catch Valdez a couple times in 2016. I don't know if you know much about Jake Rogers or what, if you think there's any calming influence there.
I think as we talk about Framber's catchers, they become very important. The guys that are catching Framber, they're very important in terms of keeping him settled, keeping him, kind of focused and things like that. I don't know about Jake Rogers and how much they overlapped, if at all, when they were in the system, but it would stand to reason that at some point, either on a backfield in minor league camp or in a A-ball game that no one's, remembers, that Framber probably threw a pitch to him at some point. So there has to be some level of familiarity there.
The one question everyone in Detroit has is about Framber Valdez and his character, and you've hinted at the growth. We all know about the cross-up controversy with his catcher that was this past September, but what can you tell us about Framber beyond that situation? You're there in the clubhouse with him. What is he like, and do the Tigers have any reason to be concerned about him?
I don't think you can look at the way his market manifested, and you can't look at the way this happened and not at least say it is due in some part to those concerns you just mentioned. The cross-up thing was a bad look. I mean, it was a bad, and that's probably putting it very mildly. I got more texts from people in baseball that night after that cross-up controversy that was a top 5 night in my career in terms of just unprompted, unwarranted texts from players, coaches, and I'm not talking about Astros players or coaches, across the league, just in absolute astonishment that happened. But as far as Framber goes, just personally, I trust the people that are around him most. I trust his teammates and I trust his coaches. And I'll say this, the guys in the clubhouse really liked Framber. The Astros players in the clubhouse really liked Framber. His coaches liked him. There were instances where Framber could be difficult to manage, but that's not unlike any other professional athletes have. They can be difficult. They can be difficult to deal with. Framber Valdez is not the first. I don't even want to call him a diva because I don't think he is, but he's not the first high maintenance guy to come through a clubhouse. This happens pretty regularly. So yeah, there were times where the coaches were frustrated with him, but coaches in there have been frustrated with everybody. But suffice to say, it's not a work ethic issue. When you meet Framber Valdez, you will very quickly see that he doesn't miss a workout. He doesn't miss a day in the gym. He is a put together individual that has great work ethic. You hear that from teammates, coaches, everybody. The one thing, and Framber has acknowledged this from the big day I started covering him in 2018, is, when things snowball on him, when an umpire misses a call or when a guy kicks a ball behind him to extend an inning, he gets very emotional. He gets very angry. He doesn't know how to control himself. And he has worked with a guy named Dr. Andy Nunez, who's who's one of the Dominican-based sports psychologists in the Astros system, who has worked with all of their Latino pitchers, but works with Framber pretty regularly. And they have made immense strides. If you watch him pitch now, you will see sometimes after a pitch he doesn't like, he'll just take a lap around the mound. Like he'll get off of the dirt, walk around the mound for a lap, and then get back. That's something that Dr. Andy taught him of how to calm down. You'll see him very deliberately on the mound, do some breathing exercises, things of that nature. That is what Dr. Andy has helped him get through. So he has come a very long way. This goes hand in hand with what I mentioned about this is a different guy since AJ Hinch managed him last. Even in that time frame, he's grown immensely. But as you have seen, there are still some ways in which he has to grow. I do not think this is a clubhouse cancer situation. I do not think this is a malcontent. I don't think this is a guy that is not going to be liked by his teammates, but it's just one of those things that sometimes when things speed up on him, when he gets into the heat of the moment and but when it's hitting the fan, Framber is not great at managing that. And so that's something that, the manager can't really help. AJ can't go out there and stop it. As it's going awry, Joe Espada couldn't, Dusty Baker couldn't. So it's one of these things that he's got to fix himself. And he's made a lot of strides in doing so, but there's still some work to be done.
That squares with, I think the last time the Tigers faced Valdez last year, he had this horrific first inning, and everything just snowballed. And then he did calm down, but there's only so much you could do. I think he gave up 7 runs. But other than that, we'll talk a little bit about his performance in general. This is a guy, 170 plus innings every year, more than 200 innings in 2022. So we know he's workhorse, but I don't know. How does he do it specifically? We know he gets a lot of ground balls. He has a nice curveball, but what have you seen from him as a pitcher?
Yeah, the ball's going to be on the ground. He's one of the hardest pitchers in baseball to elevate in terms of getting the ball in the air. A lot of sinkers down in the zone. When he came up, the reason he stayed on the Astros 40 man for the first couple of years is because everyone talked about the curveball. It was the best curveball in the Astros system. It still does grade out as one of the best pitches in baseball, but that has become less and less dominant in his repertoire. His sinker is really, really good. He can do a couple different things with how he manipulates it. He keeps it down in the zone. He's added a changeup that's pretty good. He can throw a slider to righties if he has to. He's a guy that when he gets rolling, and we always used to joke about this when, the beat writers, he's one of those guys that when he gets rolling, it is a no-hitter kind of waiting to happen. And he led the world he's a no-hitter through 5. He's a no-hitter through 6 because at his best, what he does is he's around the zone. He gets early count outs with the sinker because everyone tries to pull the sinker and they just roll over it to the third baseman. So whoever the Tigers are going to play at third base, I hope he's ready because, a lot of rollovers, a lot of guys try to pull him and roll the ball over. He gets quick, efficient outs. This is a guy that, the durability is one thing that I don't think people appreciate until it's gone. And I think the Astros are about to enter that realm. This is one of the most durable guys in the sport in a time and place where workhorses are leaving. He is a workhorse in every sense of the word. And I'm glad you brought that start up, Chris, about, when he got destroyed in Detroit last year. That's the mark of, though, being an ace or a 1 or a 2 is you get lit for the first 2 innings. And then it's all right, I got to go save the bullpen. I got to go eat 5 more innings and I got to keep us close. And he did in that game. And look, the Astros lost the game, but there's something to be said for that. There's something to be said for covering innings and there's something to be said for getting deep into games. Framber can do it all. It's really fun to watch him when he's on because when he's on, he gets the ball and goes. It's quick. No one feels comfortable facing him. When he is on and when the stuff is good, it's as good as anybody in the sport.
Chandler, I wanted to ask as well, do you have any idea what happened to Valdez in August and September back in 2025? I think in his final 10 starts, he had a 6.05 ERA. And yes, one of those starts was the 7 runs by the Tigers. But what went wrong for him down the stretch in 25?
Look, the cross-up was in there. That was a one of those starts in that streak. So don't underestimate the effect that had and the after effects of the next couple starts. I think, when I try to think back on it, like I don't think there was like one thing you can point to. I don't think it was like one pitch that wasn't working or one thing. It was just a different thing every time out. It was, the Detroit start where he gives up, 6-7 runs in the first 2 innings and then settles down, or that cross-up start against the Yankees. He was actually pitching very well. And then one bad pitch to, I think it was Trent Grisham, hit a grand slam into the Crawford boxes, and that ruined his outing. Like, the one thing he does do, the one thing about Framber that can be a little bit nerve-wracking if you're watching him is, Joe Espada always says this, Dusty Baker always used to say it, like, he is a ground ball away from getting out of anything. So he'll walk a couple guys. He'll give up some soft hits, but he is a ground ball away from a double play behind him and the inning's over. It's hard to be a ground ball away from something when you don't get the ground ball sometimes. And sometimes it just doesn't come. Sometimes, he put a couple guys on and the ground ball that was supposed to get him out of it had eyes and snuck through the 6 hole and was a base hit and 2 guys scored. The one thing about him is he's not a strikeout artist. Like, he will strike his fair number of guys out, don't get me wrong, but this isn't Tarik Skubal. This isn't going to be striking out 12 or 13 per 9. The ball is going to be in play a lot. And sometimes when you put the ball in play, some weird stuff can happen. And sometimes that happens with Framber.
I mean, Valdez, entire career in Houston, threw no hitter there, was multi-time All-Star, huge part of the 2022 World Series. Is what kind of legacy does he have? Is this the guy who's good? Like, if he comes back to Houston and pitches, is he going to get a standing ovation, or people just be like, whatever?
I think he's very underappreciated. I think he's probably one of the more underappreciated pieces of this Astros run, because look at like who he shared rotations with. Like, he shared rotations with Justin Verlander, with, Zach Greinke at times, with Lance McCullers, who's a hero in Houston for what he did to win their first World Series. Like, he always was kind of the second fiddle every time. Even though he put up these incredible numbers, he was never kind of thought of as the guy, right? There was always like, and you guys know Hunter Brown very well, like last year, even Hunter Brown usurped him as the Astros ace. And Hunter did that too toward the tail end of 2024. So Framber just kind of did his work in quiet, like never really sought fanfare. Now, I will say this, Framber loves him some Framber. He will wear t-shirts with his face on them. He will let you know that what his nicknames are. He loves his swag. He loves, being that guy, but he's never going to be the one like calling the cameras over and wanting attention. He just kind of does that naturally. So he should be remembered as a guy that allowed the Astros to let Justin Verlander walk twice, to let Garrett Cole walk after 2019, to let Zach Greinke walk, to let Charlie Morton walk. Like, all these guys that left, like, one of the reasons the Astros stayed so great pitching wise was because they had Framber Valdez. And again, it's one of those things that didn't go appreciated at the time. But I think when they come back to when Detroit comes to Dyken Park this year, I think Framber will get a standing ovation.
What can you tell us about the nicknames?
La Grasa. La Grasa is Framber's nickname. If you go back and look at kind of the meaning of grasa in Spanish really does mean like grease or like something unappealing. But in Dominican, like Framber's Dominican, in Dominican Spanish, grasa means like swag or like just kind of swaggy, like that kind of stuff. And Framber, like, the one thing you'll notice about, you don't hear Framber coming, you smell Framber coming, because he loads himself up with cologne. He's got specific colognes he wears before starts. He's got specific colognes he wears during starts. His jewelry is unmatched. His wardrobe is unmatched. He likes to look nice. He likes to have swag. And that's why he is La Grasa. And he was called that by everyone in the clubhouse. They called him Grasa, not La Grasa. But they just say Grasa, come, and he would come over. So yeah, that's his big nickname. I can imagine that will be on a t-shirt. It already is, but I imagine that will be on a Tigers t-shirt pretty soon.
Tigers fans, get ready for La Grasa and all of his swag. The last question on Framber Valdez is the contract. 3 years, $115 million, opt-out clause after the second season. What are your expectations for him in 2026 and 2027? Like, do you think that the 3.5 ERA range over like 185 innings per season, does that hold up over the next 2 seasons with the Tigers?
I think it does. I think Framber's going to age pretty well. Just given that it's not, and I don't look, pitching's unnatural no matter how hard you throw, no matter how you do it. Like, the arm is not built to throw overhand. Like, it is an unnatural motion. So I'm not sitting here saying Framber Valdez is immune from being injured, but it's not, max. He doesn't throw 98 or 99. He can get it up there and he will to show off sometimes, but it's usually like 92, 93 with the curveball. When you watch him pitch, it is not a max effort delivery. It's very just smooth. Like, it doesn't really look like he's trying when he's pitching, so that helps as well. Framber Valdez's entire Astros tenure, he was on the injured list once, and that was because he broke his finger while trying to field a ground ball in spring training. He has never had, actually, I take that back. He was on the IL one other time for what the team at the time said was like elbow soreness, but he missed 15 days, came back and threw 180 innings. Like, it was nothing to fret about. He is as healthy as any pitcher that I have covered in my time here in Houston. The one thing about him that the coaches always marveled at was that he was so resilient. Like, he's got such a rubber arm. Like, they were okay pitching him on short rest because he just never felt it. He's like that big of a guy. I think from that aspect, like, it's going to age well. Like, there's minimal injury risk as I can see it, at least. Even in, Evan, you asked me earlier, like, about that bad stretch he had. He'll have those, right? He'll have the 5 or 6 bad start stretches, but this is a guy that his ERA last year was still 3.66. It's a big luxury when you can roll out of bed, throw 175 innings and have a sub-4 ERA. And I think that it's at the minimum, that's what you'll get from Framber Valdez, and that's well worth it.
Everyone, that was Chandler Rome, the outstanding Houston Astros beat writer for The Athletic. Chandler, thanks again for joining us.
Yep, thanks, guys.
All right, it's time for all of us to get out of here. Thanks to Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report for co-hosting with me this week. And thanks to everyone for listening to the latest episode of Days of Roar. Please like, rate, share, and subscribe. Give us a rating and comment what you think about the show. Stick with freep.com/sports. for the latest Tigers coverage. I'd like to thank the editor of the Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols, and our magical producer, Robin Chan. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Evan Petzold. We'll catch you next week. Until then, go in peace.